Okay, sounds good. So when David hits record, that means we're all being recorded. So just so you know that. All right. So good morning, everyone. This is our first webinar, and I think we'll have a few more webinars. But this is going to be kind of our kickoff as far as talking about discovery and setting us up for our first on-site visits. Well, I guess our second on-site visits. We've already had that first initial meeting, but first meeting with the job candidate that you've identified, or one out of the three that you've identified. So we're going to talk about just a basic overview of discovery, which I know many of us have heard about discovery, but really I'd like to take this time to get more into the weeds of what makes discovery. And then we're going to talk specifically about voc rehab and discovery and the authorization and how that service detail kind of plays out. So I want to let you know specifically for this project, you've identified the 3 job candidates, and David has graciously made sure that everyone can get discovery authorized. But the process that I'm going to talk to you about specifically with voc rehab and discovery will be moving forward after the project. So you understand what information voc rehab might be looking for, what might help them make that decision as far as whether or not discovery would be authorized. And then we're going to talk about the home visit, which is going to lay out those steps as far as what that home visit is going to look like when we come in, when I do my next site visit, and what you might say to the individual and their family in setting that up. And then we're going to get into task and skill observation, which pulls from the information from the home visit, and then that builds into this whole discovery piece that gives us a picture of who this person is. So, and then we'll see how much content we can get through today, and we'll keep building on that as we go. So my intent is hopefully that we do a webinar, then we do on-site, then kind of webinar and on-site. So we're giving you the information, then applying the information. So I always keep this slide in here when I'm talking about customized employment, because I think it's important to know there are various ways of supporting folks to get jobs, right? Many of us are very comfortable in traditional supported employment. So that means, we're taking traditional methods, maybe using some sales approach, we're using some labor market analysis to say what businesses are hiring, and then I look at my caseload of folks and then say, okay, well, this person would fit into this position. So that's one approach, right? But we know that that approach doesn't work for everybody, because we still have folks in facility-based settings that aren't working in the community, where that traditional approach maybe isn't meeting their needs. There's also individual placement and support as another approach to supporting folks to obtain employment, which uses 8 guiding principles. It's an evidence-based model. And then there's customized employment, right? So customized employment's been termed by the Office of Disability Employment Policy, and it really focuses on using this competency-based approach in place of that traditional assessment. So discovery is not an assessment. It takes the place of the traditional assessment that we might use, that is a Q&A of, do you enjoy doing this? Can you stoop? Can you lift? How many pounds can you lift? So discovery takes place of that. So when we do discovery, it's not a question and answer session. It's a conversation, and those things are very different. And it's not a set amount of questions we ask. We let the conversation go where it needs to. And so that's really a big difference than, the traditional means and assessments that we may have used. So again, it's not to say that those assessments aren't a good way. It just means those assessments don't work for everybody. And at this point in time, we're all charged with supporting all people to find employment. who want a job, right? So we have to use various methods, and customized employment and discovery is one way of doing that, and a specific way that we're going to focus on for this project. So why discovery? Why are we using discovery instead of maybe that traditional assessment? So the traditional assessment is we get to know a job candidate through a standardized set of questions or tools. And that kind of thinking has led us to believing that folks might be unemployable, because when we use a comparative analysis, that can highlight somebody's deficits. And if we're comparing them to a job description or a certain position, it's very easy to say, well, gee, this person's unemployable. So for example, if you pulled out the job description for a high school math teacher and you looked at my skills, you're going to say that I'm unemployable if that's your measurement. But it's not true. I am employable, but just not as a math teacher, right? So it's the assessment that kind of led us to that belief, right? So that can also lead us to being unsure of what folks can do, because the reality is we all support individuals who have a really significant impact of disability, where, you know, in job development, you might be thinking, well, gee, I'm just not sure what this person can do. And that's okay, because the process of discovery and working as a team is going to lead us there. And it's okay to not know those answers right away. And I even think that when we jump to those answers right away, we're really kind of doing a disservice, because we haven't even gotten a picture of who this person is yet. Also, that traditional assessment can be comparative, and we focus on deficits. And it doesn't pull in the people that really know this person at their best outside of the facility or outside of environments that we've traditionally supported a person in. So the cool thing about discovery is it's a different approach in getting to know a job candidate, and it's through a qualitative, individualized process. So it doesn't happen in a large group setting because it's individualized, right? So we see the person's strengths, not their deficits, because all people have strengths, all people have contributions. It's oftentimes the environment or the lens that we're viewing that person through that might highlight their deficits instead of their strengths. Also, when we use the process of discovery, it gives us permission to not jump to the job or the career yet. And what I mean by that is, as we get to know someone, when you start discovery, you shouldn't know the specific job this person's going to be in yet, because the whole intent of discovery is to learn who this person is. And then through that process, that guides us to where we go. We also focus on contributions, skills, and abilities. So, and we learn about these contributions, skills, and abilities by meeting the job seeker in environments where they're at their best. So that's one of the biggest important pieces about that home visit, right? Because if we think about ourselves, oftentimes we are most comfortable in our home, in an environment and design. And that's also why we'll talk about, you know, the opportunity to see someone's bedroom, not in a creepy way, but oftentimes if I'm living in a group home, that might be the only space that's really truly mine, or if I live with somebody else. Also, discovery relies heavily on information from those who know the person best. So family members are incredibly important in this process. Friends, family, anyone who is not paid to be in the person's life. And for some of the folks that you've identified, they may not have a large extended network, and that's okay. But we always want to say, okay, if we're working with Joe, who are the important people in Joe's life? And ideally, that's friends, family, folks that aren't paid to be in his life. And if the only people who are in his life are paid, that also gives us a red flag to say, hey, we need to support Joe in building relationships outside of the service provider. So an overview of customized employment. So when we think about customized employment as a whole, something has to be negotiated, right? In order to make something customized, something needs to be changed or negotiated to fit the person. And we can't really get to customized employment unless we have a really good picture of who this person is. And we use discovery as the vehicle to get us to that customized employment outcome. Because when we know the person really, really well, that helps us to have the level of information we need to customize the outcome, if that makes sense. So Office of Disability Employment Policy has defined discovery and customized employment, and it's competency-based, it's qualitative. So again, discovery is not a 3-page questionnaire that you take to a home visit. And that can be really uncomfortable for some of us if we've traditionally had that pen and paper, right? And that guide. So instead, I want you to think of general open-ended questions, which we'll give some examples today. And then I'll model that for you when we set up the home visit. So that it's a conversation, and it's okay to take a small pen and paper with you. If you're anything like me, I have a hard time remembering things sometimes. So if I write down certain words, that'll help trigger my memory. But I oftentimes will always ask for permission if it's okay for me to take notes before we start the meeting. Also, it's made up of a series of tools and techniques that get us there. So there's a process with discovery. And then it's one of various approaches to supporting people to obtain employment. I want to make that really clear, that it is totally okay if you're supporting folks to fill out applications and obtain employment, if that's the method they want to use to get there, and if that makes for the good fit. But for folks who have trouble competing with a job description, discovery and customized employment is another set of tools that we can use to support them to obtain employment. And then when we use customized employment, something has to be negotiated, right? So sometimes we may even go through discovery and the person may end up in a traditional wage job. And that's great, that's fine. Oftentimes that does happen, but folks are in a much better fit than, more traditionally just going and filling out applications and trying to compete. And when we go about discovery and customized, we're not really looking for jobs in newspaper or want ads. We're letting the person drive where we go. We're not looking at labor market statistics in this type of approach. Also, discovery is the precursor to customized employment. In order to customize something, we have to get to know the person well, and we use discovery as the method of doing so. Also, discovery often leads us to finding the jobs behind the jobs that aren't posted, the jobs that don't have maybe even a job description yet. Because we get to know the business on the other side of the process through informational interviews, and we'll get into all of that stuff as well. But we end up learning more about business by asking for advice, by building that rapport, which many of you have in your communities already. It's just capitalizing on that and saying, hey, is there a way that, we want to connect, to go back a second, we want to connect people with like interests. So if we're working with a job seeker, let's say Joe, and Joe's really interested in agriculture, then we want to connect with the people in your community who are really into agriculture. And I think that's where your coalition can really also come in handy and be a huge benefit to you all. Is you may meet monthly and say, Rodney might say, well, I'm working with Joe who's into ag, but I don't know a lot of folks in agriculture in the community. But then Cody might say, well, gee, I know so-and-so, and I'll be that one connection that can connect you and that job seeker to that business so that Joe can continue to learn about the jobs in agriculture, which could be anything from farming to a seed company, to mowing lawns, to lawn care, to sharpening blades, to working on tractors. There's a huge theme, right? So we think in themes instead of job description. So that's a little teaser for something we'll talk about here in a little bit, and maybe even the second webinar. And then I think the biggest piece is when we do discovery and customized employment, one, it takes folks about a year to really come proficient in doing discovery and customized employment. And that's okay, right? Because anytime you're learning something, it's going to take time. But I think one of the biggest pieces that you learn the more you do discovery is translation of observation into contribution. So it's going to that home visit, and knowing and being able to see, okay, this person, let's see, it was a home visit we did last year, and this individual was sharing that he was really into woodworking in high school. And so he took me up to his room and showed me this beautiful chest that he made and some shelves that he was building with his parent. And then all of a sudden his grandpa at the end of the meeting said, well, you know, Joe always comes over every Saturday and we work in my garage and we tinker around. And it's like, whoa, there's some skills there, right? So we want to observe Joe in that environment with Grandpa because one, it's comfortable. It may highlight him at his best. It's something he does on a regular basis. And it allows us to see a really different side of who this person is as opposed to just seeing them in the facility or school or when they come to our office and answer questions, right? So discovery is not those things. It's getting to know the person in environments that highlight them at their best. So Office of Disability Employment Policy defines customized employment as the means to individualizing the employment relationship between employees and employers in ways that meet the needs of both. So the big piece is the relationship. So we're individualizing the relationship. We're getting to know the job seeker first and getting to know them really well, right? We want to be able to answer the question, who is this person? And then we let that information drive where we go next. It drives the businesses that we talk to. It drives the relationships that are developed because we want to connect people with like interests, and we also want to connect individuals with businesses that need their skills, right? And so we have to essentially do discovery on both ends, discovery of getting to know the person and discovery of getting to know businesses. But the biggest piece with customized employment is the business doesn't drive where the individual goes. The individual drives where they go. So some core components of discovery. Discovery directs all planning for job development. So again, we always start with the job seeker. That person, it doesn't matter if they say, well, gee, I'm really into, let's keep with the agricultural theme. But you just read an article in, Farmers R Us that says ag is really down. Well, that doesn't mean we're going to stray Joe from that because there are tons of jobs in agriculture. There are tons of jobs all around. That's the biggest myth is businesses are always hiring. If you can figure out how to support that business to make more money, they're interested, right? If you can help that business to make their business more efficient, they're interested. It's just how we go about it versus saying, well, are you hiring? Do you have a specific, position? Businesses don't have, the easy answer is no. Also, the core components of discovery is it's time limited. So we've been supporting folks for a long time, right? Maybe they've been in job development for 6-9 months. That's not the intent of discovery. Discovery ideally is completed in 6 to 8 weeks. And so the first couple of times you do it, it might take longer. And it's also may require you to look at the structure of your job development program. When I was at Candeo, we very much had to look at how we were structured. Did it allow us to do really good discovery with the structure that we were operating under? And the difficult answer was no. So we had to make some changes. Again, it's competency-based. So if you complete discovery and identify that a person's unemployable, you did discovery wrong. Discovery always leads to seeing individuals' skills and abilities. You may not know what job they're going to end up in, and that's okay. But it always leads to identifying contribution, skill, and ability, no matter what. It all starts with the home visit. So discovery always starts with getting to know a person in an environment where they feel comfortable. And 98% of the time, that should be the individual's home. And we'll talk about those few situations where maybe it's not a person's home. It also relies heavily on unpaid professionals. So we want to talk to people in the individual's life who are not paid to be there. And those are our first folks that we really want to pick their brain about who this person is. It also incorporates benefits planning and creativity with resources. So many of the folks that we're supporting have tons of resources at their fingertips that could be a benefit to them and the business. So we'll also talk more about that. But oftentimes we don't know what resources are available that we can get really creative with unless we pull in that benefits planning piece. So I know that you guys have a benefits planner through Workforce, so it's great that he's the coalition, and maybe even VR has some counselors who have been through the benefits planning training in your region as well. So, or maybe you have folks at your agencies too. So that benefits planning piece is really important. So discovery is not vocational evaluation, right? We've already talked about that. It's not this, ooh, where did I go? Hold on, technical difficulty. What happened? Okay, we're back. Sorry about that. All right, so vocational it's not a specific evaluation, right? We're not using a traditional assessment. It also doesn't happen in segregated settings. So completing a skill and task observation in our facility really doesn't fit the intent of discovery. Discovery is intended to be outside of our building. It's meant to take place in, it could be even the person's home. It could be various businesses. It takes place in various settings. But we don't use the facility because oftentimes that's not necessarily where, that might have been the only available option for that person at that time, or it may not highlight them at their best, right? Also, it's not a checklist. So I've oftentimes, when we go through training, folks will say, well, I created this great discovery checklist or this great discovery Q&A. That's not the intent of discovery. I know that it's comfortable to create maybe a 3-page question and answer, but that's not the intent of discovery, because then we're driving where the conversation is going, and that's not the intent. Believe me, once you feel comfortable and having those conversations, you'll know the kind of questions to help get the conversation going. But the really rich information comes when we're not standardizing discovery. Also, discovery is an unpaid work experience or community-based training, right? So it's not a volunteer activity. We may use various pieces, but the end goal is always paid employment. So it's not using discovery to get a long-term volunteer position. Discovery leads us to paid employment, and that's always the intent. So think about it. So are you at your best when you're being tested? Did you take the ACT or Iowa standardized assessments in school? Did that highlight you at your best? And for usually there's always 1 or 2 persons who, that did highlight you at your best. But if you're anything like me, that highlighted me at my worst. It really didn't show my skills in taking a test. So when you think about it that way, oftentimes traditional assessments can highlight a person not at their best. And it only highlights maybe those deficits. And discovery is a different approach where we really look at people in a different way rather than those traditional assessments. So discovery will answer. So when you might ask, well, how do I know, if we've done discovery well, or how do I know when we're done? You should be able to answer, who is this person? And if you don't have that information, then that's where maybe we want to ask for additional discovery or maybe additional authorizations. We also want to know, what are their ideal conditions of employment? And this is really important. We all have ideal conditions of employment. For me, flexibility is an ideal condition. No matter what position I worked in, I've had that flexibility of my schedule, that it's not really rigid where it's 8 to 5 and clock in, clock out. That doesn't highlight me at my best. Also, ideal conditions are, is it a small environment or a large environment? Some people want to work from home. Some people want to work in a really big environment with all sorts of different people and maybe various managers. That might be an ideal condition. Ideal conditions are also hours, days of the week. It can be accommodations. What, if I utilize a wheelchair, it's going to be really important that I'm in an accessible environment, and that's going to be an ideal condition for me. Through discovery, you should be able to, pull these answers. You want to be able to have a really good picture of who the person is. And then what themes drive job development? So when we're doing discovery, we don't want to think in specific job descriptions, because job descriptions are comparative and they're limiting. And it makes our jobs as job developers really hard. Whereas if we think of a theme instead, so think of maybe my theme is helping people. I have a strong desire to work with people and in environments where I feel like I'm contributing or helping or assisting. So if we think of that, think of all the different types of jobs that or businesses that might fit within a helping theme profession. So let's pull up our group chat here. Hopefully everybody can see it. So I want you to just list a business that, when you think of helping people, what is a business that might fit under that? So I will start. So maybe like an assisted care facility. What else would we help people do? Or a helping theme? Can everybody see the group chat? Okay, fast food. There could be some helping. There's certainly, and that might also tie to a culinary theme too, if we were supporting people in food. Law enforcement, fantastic. Customer service, sure. What else? Hospital, fantastic. And customer service is good, but we can also, customer service might also be where we start thinking more of a job description too. But that's still fairly open. What else? These are great.
School district.
A school district, fantastic. Could be physical therapy. A grocery store, okay. Where else might we help people? Like, and maybe it's one-on-one childcare, fantastic. So as you can see, we've already got, let's see, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. So in 2 minutes, we came up with 7 different businesses. So the idea is, when we think in themes, it's much easier to think of what are all the types of businesses that fit under this theme. And then we just go start talking to those businesses. And we don't necessarily ask if folks are hiring or go fill out the job application, because at that point, that's when we start doing the research about the business and we start learning. And as job developers, you don't need to be the expert in every single business and industry. That's what those people are out there for, right? That's why we connect with our community. That's why we're part of the fabric of our community, because it's all about connecting people. That's really the intent of job development, and is connecting people. We're in the business of connecting others, and it's connecting others with like interests, right? So, for example, in college, if you think about your own process of how you got to a certain position, I really thought that I was going to go to nursing school. Like that was going to be my end all be all. And so, but as I got into college, I realized there were a lot of science and math classes I was going to have to take. And if you remember, math is not one of my skills, right? Like that doesn't highlight me at my best, but that's kind of a requirement for the position, right? So as I started pursuing nursing, I really started realizing, well, this isn't highlighting me at my best, but I still have this really strong desire to work with people. And so then I thought, well, gee, like maybe if I could tell people stories, that would be helping people. And so I went down this journalism path, but it still remained, the underlying theme was working with people. But then I found that that was really unfulfilling because I was just kind of sticking my nose in people's business, and it wasn't personally fulfilling to me. But I really loved getting to know various people in various settings and learning about different businesses. And that was one of my favorite pieces about the job. And then I ended up as a job developer, right? And it was kind of the merging of all that I wanted in a position. I could continue to get to know and learn about various types of businesses, but I also got to work one-on-one with people and help people and support people to find employment, right? So you see how that process, for me, it took, a lot of years to get there, but we want to kind of condense that and get that done within, we want to complete discovery in 6 to 8 weeks and then let that drive job development. So it's really important that we think in themes and not job descriptions. And the biggest piece of advice at this point that I can give you is to trust the process, gather the information, and let that take us where we need to go. Don't jump to the job description. Don't jump and say, well, I just met Joe and he's really interested in mowing lawns, so we're going to go fill out an application and help him mow lawns. If Joe is 18 years old and has never worked a day in his life and has had limited life experiences, then let's use discovery to really support him to test out various types of things, just as you and I did in high school. Maybe he watches HGTV every day for 2.5 hours when he gets home from school. Well, there's definitely some interest there and probably some building, right? And let's maybe connect him with a carpenter in town, or someone who builds furniture, or flips houses, right? So that's where we then let that process take us, if that makes sense. And we want to have multiple themes too, but we'll get to that. So the handout that I emailed last week was the core components of customized employment. And I love this document for various reasons. But as from one point, from the structural standpoint, so for those of you who are managers or directors, utilizing this process may make you want to change some things, or change the job description, or change how the position operates. And this document is beautiful for recreating job descriptions because it goes over the skills, abilities, and tasks that build up that somebody needs to do discovery and customized employment. The competencies are planning and organizing, and positive and open approach to life, knowing tools about customized employment, respecting and relating to others. So as you networking, it makes up this really big position, right? And then there are the 4 components of customized employment, which we'll look at in more detail right here. So when you look at this document, and any document really that talks about customized employment, there are 4 distinct phases. And, whether you're learning about discovery through Mark Golden Associates or Griffin Hammes, or, whomever is talking about customized employment, you always start with discovery because we got to get to know who this person is. And that leads us to job search planning. So then we have to take the information that we learned about the individual and we move that towards that planning process, towards meaningful employment. That's when we might develop those lists of businesses that fit under those themes. It's when we be, talking about benefits. And then we get into job development and negotiation, right? Because we have a really big picture of who this person is. And now we're really starting that negotiation with a potential business, or maybe setting up an internship that could lead to paid employment. And then we always plan for those post-employment supports, because for folks that you're supporting with customized employment, job coaching is probably going to look pretty different for folks, right? We have to use really good teaching and support strategies in supporting folks with the biggest impact of disability. And that may, getting to stabilization might take longer. And they may be on waiver job coaching for years, and that's okay. It's still community paid employment, right? And that's going to look different for everybody. But don't feel like it's, oh, if this person can't graduate coaching in 90 days, then they might not be a good fit. That's not the case. We want to plan for those post-employment supports to make sure the person has everything they need to be successful on the job. And oftentimes we will see when someone's in a really, really good fit, those post-employment supports become even easier because the person's in such a good fit. So I'm a visual learner. And so we think about, oftentimes it's really easy to just jump to home visit to wanting to plug somebody into a job. But there's a lot that happens in between that really gets us to that customized employment outcome. And discovery is a process. So we start with the home visit. Then we do skill and task observation. We pull in some benefits planning. That information leads us to where we go and do informational interviews and what businesses we go and we ask for advice from. And then maybe that's where we do some work trials. We finalize those vocational themes that we were just talking about. That may also be a time when unsolicited job offers pop up, right? And those unsolicited job offers can sometimes be an extension of discovery because we learn through the process, well, maybe this wasn't the best fit for somebody. Or maybe we, chopped off discovery too early. But be expecting of those. And it's okay to say, well, I'm not sure that this would be the best fit for the person, or, maybe they're telling you that. And then we get to that customized employment outcome. And, it will look different for everybody. For some people, maybe it's only going to be 12 weeks. For some people, maybe it's 6 months, because we have to do some more negotiation, or we just still have some unanswered questions about who this person is. But in the ideal world, our goal is 6 to 8 weeks, and then we move into job development. So outcomes of the discovery process. So after we've completed discovery, after we've gotten a really good picture of who this person is, here are some outcomes that might happen, right? So typical wage employment. So what I mean by this is the individual ends up working in a position where, there is a job description, and that's okay. It just means that it's not customized. You use discovery to get there, but if nothing was negotiated, it's not customized. Totally fine. Non-typical wage employment, which, could be self-employment, or maybe it's a carved position where, we've gone in and we've carved out various roles from other positions to make one position. It could be a customized internship or apprenticeship. So an example of this is we're doing some work in Utah with transition age youth. And those students are somewhere between 18 and 21. And the school's involved, but maybe they're coming back for a year of school. And so we've learned their themes before graduation, and we've connected with some businesses. And so the intent is we want to set up maybe a paid apprenticeship or internship during the summer. So one of the guys that we're working with, he is going to do an apprenticeship with a butcher because he's really into carving meats and that whole meat industry. So he has a paid apprenticeship this summer with the butcher so that he can gain more skills and then, be more hireable within this position, right? Or within other meat packing industries. Also, it could be resource ownership, which is really, really cool. And I think there's prime opportunity for resource ownership in small towns because small towns are made up of small businesses, which we love. So when you're working with an individual who has resources, which maybe they receive both SSI and SSDI or a Title II benefit, so this is where your benefits planner comes in, but this person is a perfect pass candidate, which means they can set aside resources. They already have additional income coming in through a Title II check. But the big point is I want you to know is that there could be resources that they can purchase a piece of equipment that would support that business to either be more efficient, more effective, offer a different service. So for example, one of my colleagues supported an individual in Minnesota who has used resource ownership. He worked at a restaurant and he had kind of this culinary theme, I believe. And what ended up happening is he used his own resources to purchase an ice cream machine. And he makes his own ice cream and sells that within the restaurant that he's always worked at. So for the restaurant, they're now bringing in a different customer base. They're offering a new product, but they weren't the ones that had to invest in the equipment to do so. The individual that you're supporting brings their resources and is able to purchase that ice cream machine to get there. But we don't just jump into resource ownership. The process really leads us there because we have to have a really strong, rich knowledge base of who the person is and the business. It could also lead to supported self-employment. So maybe I have a job coach that supports me on my own self-employment venture. So my sister is a great example of this. She owns her own coffee shop in Independence, Iowa, but she has job coaches that support her in doing that. A business within a business. The resource ownership example that I gave you, that could also be a business within a business example. There's an ice cream business within a restaurant business. Or it can be a combination of all of those, right? So discovery leads us to various outcomes, but all of those outcomes are paid employment. And just remember, in order for something to be considered customized, so when you're doing, when you're looking at the data that Dave is requesting, and it says, how many positions are customized, if you negotiated something for that person, then it would be considered customized, right? So that negotiation thing is key. If you didn't negotiate anything, then it's not customized. And again, that's okay. It's just, where does that fall, right? Okay, so the process for this project only. So you want to identify the job seekers, which I believe all of you have done. And you want to make sure that those individuals are referred to VR and made known to Kelly. So if you haven't let Kelly know who those people are, you need to do that right away. And then request a discovery authorization for those individuals so that we can ensure that you're getting paid for the services that you're going to provide. And then from there, so once you know who these folks are, you've made them known to Kelly. Kelly says, great, that's wonderful. Let's go ahead and get discovery authorized. Then I want you to start talking and preparing this individual and schedule a home visit. And then that will be when I come out and provide TA. So we'll need to work our schedules a little bit. And it's okay if the home visit happens in the evening or morning or weekend. We just need to work our schedules to make that happen. So we want to schedule at least one home visit that I can provide you TA during. So ideally that's maybe your first one, so I can go ahead and model it, we'll debrief, and then I would want you to set up home visits with your other two individuals that you're supporting. It's really important that we debrief and talk about, hey, how did it go? So you can say, hey, Ashley, I'm not sure why you took the conversation in this direction, or we want to talk about what we learned, and then let that take us to our next steps, right? So then that drives where we go to next, what informational interviews we might want to do, what observations we want to do. So, well, once we get this process going, we should be talking on a pretty regular, I would ideally say weekly basis. And I'm all about phone calls, emails, so it'll be really important that we have one another's contact information. And then that takes us to skill and task observations. So from the home visit, like I talked about, we want to identify 3 observations that are related to what was learned in the home visit. So this is sometimes where we have a breakdown in discovery as we do the home visit, but then the observations we do have nothing to do with what we learned in the home visit. So it's really important that each step builds upon the next. So with discovery, and what's the funding available to us when we do discovery in Iowa, right? So one, we have to, in order to receive discovery through VR, you have to go through VR's eligibility. And so we're going to talk about that process. and then who IVRS identifies as a good fit for discovery, which is important. And then we want to break down some myths of discovery as well. So here's the process in general when we're working in collaboration with Voc Rehab. So if you're, say, working with individuals in your, say they're in pre-voc right now, and you know that they want to obtain employment, because if they're in pre-voc, the long-term goal is employment, right? So you want to be referring those folks to VR. So at that point, once you refer the individual, and it's really important, the more information that you can provide VR during the referral, the quicker the intake process becomes. So as providers, we already have a lot of really rich information about who the person is. That includes their social history. So VR is going to need to know what their diagnosis is from and have that documentation. If you have copies of their ID or their social security card for your intake process, if you can share that information, any documentation that you have, ask what that you can do to help make sure, and we can send out that specific list too. I don't have it right in front of me. But if you can give counselors that specific information, that's going to help that intake process move quickly. So we make the referral. VR completes the intake, and then the VR counselor is going to do their assessment and eligibility. So from the counselor perspective, even though you may know this person fairly well, from maybe the pre-vocational setting, but you still need a lot of information when it comes to job development. The VR counselor is still going to take all that information and make their assessment on what the next steps might be. And if you differ on viewpoints, that's okay, but make sure you're talking about, well, this is why maybe I believe discovery would be a good option for this individual. And then you're going to meet to discuss the authorizations and the next steps. So the VR counselor is going to say, well, based on my assessment, this individual is eligible for services, and I'd like to go in this next step. So that might be when they say, let's just move into job development. Let's just move into, discovery, because you don't know a lot about who this person is yet. And then we get into the service delivery, right? So you get the authorization, and here's the expectation. So this is just in general, not necessarily for the project specifically. So when we look at the process, we have to go through referral and eligibility, which is the employment analysis form. And we're going to walk through that just a little bit. I know many of you are probably more than comfortable with the form, but I just want to talk about a couple of pieces. Then we get to discovery, which is that discovery plan and dialogue and the positive personal profile, and then additional authorization. So you may be authorized for discovery, and then after those 10 to 12 hours, you might say, well, we just don't have enough information yet. And that's okay. That's where that dialogue piece comes in, and you're going to have a conversation with the team and say, well, we've got some good initial information, but we still need to know more about this individual's skills and abilities. And, a job shadow would help us to explore this further, or authorizing career exploration, or maybe you need to request discovery again. But it's all about the information you provide and the justification for what comes next, if that makes sense. So who's discovery intended for? And this information is pulled directly from the Voc Rehab Provider Manual on page 24. So someone who's been looking for employment for an extended period of time. So as a job developer, there had been individuals that had been on my caseload for more than a year, right? Like that's a long time. But there was something I was missing as a job developer. And so that's where discovery could be authorized, so we can go back and really get a better picture of who this person is. Maybe they've spent time in a facility-based environment. They're a prime candidate for discovery, because we need to get to know them outside of that environment. Has limited life experience. So maybe they're just unsure of that vocational goal, right? So maybe the only thing I've ever done is wash dishes in high school. And so when you meet me, I say, well, yeah, I could wash dishes. Well, that doesn't mean I want to do that for the rest of my life. Would any of you want to wash dishes for the rest of your life? So let's expose folks to various career paths. And then if they still come back and say, dishwashing is really, where I feel at my best. Okay. Well then, let's pursue that, but let's not just jump to the conclusion that this is where that person wants to be long-term. Has had various employment, but has difficulty maintaining a job. So I imagine many of us have worked with those folks that, getting him a job is easy. It's the keeping it part. We're still missing something there. And an example is an individual that we worked with in a project search setting, and he really wanted to work directly with people. So we made the assumption that patient transport would be a really good fit for him. And that's where you're transporting patients to, maybe from their patient room to X-ray and then X-ray back to their patient room. And he kept not showing up for his job. Or he would be wandering around the hospital. He was doing anything but doing his job, right? So we were missing something. And what it took was coming back and really having some conversations with the people who knew him best. And we found out that he was really afraid of folks dying. So, while he loved the hospital environment, he had this fear of getting attached to people and people being ill and people eventually dying. And so that was a really big piece, but we didn't figure that out until we had some really solid conversations with people who knew him best. And then we figured out, okay, well, let's support him in positions that are at the hospital, but aren't working directly with patients. And things drastically changed when we did that. Folks who have had no prior work experience are great candidates for discovery, right? Because we want to expose them and get to know really who this person is before we just jump into plugging them into positions, because then we run the risk of supporting people to get into jobs that aren't a good fit. And I'm sure all of us have been in those jobs and they are painful, right? Like, you don't want to do your job. You don't want to get out of bed to go to that job. And so then we can see some sabotaging taking place because maybe we're not listening to someone, and so they just choose to not go to the job. Folks who have been labeled as unemployable. So oftentimes, if we've used that traditional assessment phase, we might see that a person's been labeled as unemployable. But we know through discovery that all people have skills and abilities, and that leads us to employment. And that discovery and customized employment is not disability specific. So it can be it can work for folks with intellectual and developmental disabilities. It can work for folks who experience chronic mental illness. It can work for folks without disabilities too. So it really can be a benefit to various folks. So the launching pad for discovery is the employment analysis form when we're talking specifically about Iowa here and Voc Rehab. So the employment analysis is really what initiates services with Voc Rehab and contracting between you and VR. So that can be completed by Voc Rehab or you as the provider. If the provider is referring the job candidate, then we have to make sure that section 1 is completed, which I'm sure this is just, I'm rehashing things for you. And then after the referral, the team meeting is set up to identify those next steps, right? So a big piece on the employment analysis is question 9, and I want you to pay attention to question 9, because this is what counselors are using to identify if they should consider discovery services. So question 9 says, list any known conditions required for this job candidate to work, non-negotiables such as transportation, hours, days, wage, environments. If unknown, consider discovery services. So if you don't know these things, or you might say unknown, still need to get to know who this person is outside a facility-based environment, then that is the trigger for the counselor to consider discovery. But if I think anytime we ask a question, that triggers us to want to put information in there, right? So that might be the information that's directing the counselor to say, well, let's go explore custodial services. But maybe that's the only thing the individual has ever done. And we know that we want to do discovery because that's the only position the person's done, and we've got to get to know more about who the person is, right? So we might want to come back and say, well, this is all I know, but really we have a lot of things that are unknown, right? So that's a big piece that we need to focus on, is that question 9. So, all right, let's keep plugging along. So myth number 1, if a CRP or provider provides residential or rehabilitation supports to the job candidate, they already know the person and we don't need to do discovery. So that's one of the biggest myths, and something that I hear from a lot of providers. But it's really important, and counselors are going to be watching this too, that to know that providers often do not know the person, right? Even if the agency serves the individual in a different setting. So as the job developer, we may be supporting this person in residential services, but that doesn't mean that I know who this person is, right? Because I'm not the one who's providing residential services. I'm the job developer, so I don't know that person in that setting. So discovery still can and should be authorized for folks, even if we are providing, the provider is also providing them residential day hab or vocational services. And then discovery requires a different skill set that can take translating observation into skill and contribution. And this takes time and training experience. So I'm just going to pause for one moment. I'll be right back. Sorry about the pause. I'm back. All right. So myth number 2, discovery is only for those who have tried everything else and failed. So discovery can be a great support for a variety of job candidates, right? So refer to page 24 of the VR manual that outlines exactly who it's intended for. And then additionally, discovery is intended for job candidates who have had limited experience, right? Or maybe not sure where they want to go vocationally. And particularly if we're working with folks that are that transition age and have limited life experiences. So myth number 3, the job candidate's too disabled to work, right? We know that all people are employable, and in conjunction with Iowa's Employment First mission, Voc Rehab has stated clearly that no job candidate is too disabled to work. So it's really important that we all see that all folks are employable and can contribute, but that's going to look different for a lot of different people. That might be working 5 hours a week. It might be working 15 hours a week. It might be working 40 hours a week. It looks different for everybody. All right, so now we're going to get more into the weeds with the discovery process. So now discovery's been authorized and we can jump in. So this is kind of where we're at in the process. So step number 1, the home visit, is where we get started. So we want to set up that home visit and really start that initial dialogue of who this person is. So where does the home visit fit in? So specifically as a provider, a home visit doesn't just have to be with discovery. So for example, if you're looking at your admissions process, what we learned was that that we were already in our admissions process and getting to know someone, we would be meeting with them at their home. And oftentimes we were asking those same exact questions in the home visit as we were in our admissions process. So what we did was in our admissions process, we just built that home visit in there. So it might be something that you just build in there internally. Also, you can use career exploration through waiver to do a home visit. That's also in there. You can do it with job development and then discovery if authorized. So you have the home visit is a really great way to initially get to know someone, and you can do it in a variety of ways, right? It doesn't just have to be when you're authorized for discovery VR. So the home visit, what is it? It's the first step in discovery, right? So 98% of the time you should be meeting with the person at their home or where they are most comfortable. And there will be those times when the individual says, I'm really not comfortable in my home and it doesn't highlight me at my best. And then you say, okay, well, where does highlight you at your best? But oftentimes it's never at our office, right? And that's good. That's okay. We want to be meeting with people where they're most comfortable. It's the first way to assess and learn who someone is. And then it's the first way of gathering some initial information. And it's really important that you invite people who know the job seeker at their best. So is that, and ask that person, this meeting is going to feel different than traditional meetings we've had. And I want you to think of people who know you really well. And who are those folks? And I'd like you to invite them to the meeting. So what does it look and feel like? So the home visit is not an annual review. It's not an IEP. It's comfortable. It's conversational. And we really use active and smooth listening to get that information. It's not that traditional Q&A. Also, plan for 1 to 2 hours. It really shouldn't be shorter than an hour. And it really shouldn't be over 2 hours, because when we've gone over 2 hours, the human brain just gets a little foggy, right? Like we all start to check out a little bit. Oftentimes it may be scheduled during an evening or weekend. So if you're only working traditional hours, Monday through Friday, 8 to 5, which I'm guessing none of you are, because many of us in this industry don't, right? But we want it to be planned when people can be available. And oftentimes that might be the evening or weekend. It feels like a pizza party. So this does not mean that you have to provide pizza. If you want to, that's totally fine. We've done that in home visits. It's great. But it should feel like a conversational dinner, right? It shouldn't feel like that traditional Q&A and really formal. It should feel conversational. And the best way to get to know someone is in their environment, not ours. So we want to get to know folks where they feel most comfortable. And then what you learn drives that process, drives the discovery process. What you learn in the home visit drives us to where we go next. So who do we want to invite? We want to invite the job candidate, right? The most important person. We want to make sure that they're there. I've also been to home visits where they say, well, we want Joe to be there, but he really hates meetings. Okay, that's totally fine. Joe is in charge, and so he can come in and out of the meeting as he pleases. I've also found that the meeting feels so different and is so competency-based that the individual sticks around for 2 hours and wants to be there because it's a much different meeting than maybe what we're used to. Also, we want to make sure family is there. And in this process, we don't judge family because we don't know what they've been through. We haven't walked in their shoes. And so, but they're important and we want them there. Friends. And again, this is all based on the job candidate's approval of who attends. So they are in charge. If they don't want their family there, we respect that. But if they do, we really want to make sure that we can include them and work around their schedule. Friends that they've identified, maybe neighbors. Invite the VR counselor. I understand that they have very busy schedules and may not be able to be there, but the counselors who have attended have found it to be beneficial. So make sure that you extend that invitation. The waiver case manager, if they have a case manager that they've been working with, they're great to invite. If they're transition age, or maybe they continue to stay in touch with their teacher or associate, invite them. So anyone who knows the job candidate well. If they're not listed, but the person says, hey, this person is really important to me in my life, invite them, maybe significant others, whomever. But people who know the person well, we want at the meeting. So next is you've got to give people a heads up that the home visit is different than traditional meetings, because oftentimes folks don't want to sit through another meeting, like they're meeting out. And the next step is to provide some good explanations to the employment seeker and their family about what this process looks like. So we explain that discovery is a different process of getting to know someone that leads to employment. And that we want to be clear about what it is and what's expected of them. So we want to get to know Joe, and we want to learn about Joe from the people who know him best. And we want to make certain the information that you have is current and complete. So it's important that we check back with the team through the process and say, am I on the right track in getting to know your son or daughter? Did I capture this information? Real quick, Cody has a question. Will you be able to send the PowerPoint to the group? Absolutely. Yeah. So I will share the PowerPoint. The PowerPoint, we're only going to get through about half of it today, and then the next half will be for the next webinar. So just know that if you see a big stop in the middle, that's what that is. Great question. All right. So let's keep plugging away. Let's take a few minutes. Do we have questions so far into the process? If you want to go ahead and use the chat box. Go ahead and let's just make sure we're all on the same page. All right, we'll give you a few more, 60 more seconds. Okay, I'm assuming we're all on the same page, so we will keep plugging away. All right. So we describe the home visit and say, hey, we want to get to know Joe. Joe is in job development. He's interested. Well, technically he's in discovery, right? We're not to job development yet, but we know he's interested in employment. We're learning about this new process called discovery. And, you can even say we have some technical assistance as we learn this new process. And, it's not going to feel like a traditional meeting, and we're going to do little of the talking, and it's really about getting to know who Joe is from the people who know him best. So would you mind inviting some people who know Joe to the meeting on, Monday from 5 to 7. And, this is kind of how the meeting will go. It's going to be conversational. It's going to be not a traditional assessment, and it's really all of the information that is shared is valuable and important. It's not, well, this was valuable and this wasn't. So we want to let people know it's going to feel different. So scheduling the home visit. We want to schedule the first meeting with the individual and the family at the person's home. If meeting at the home is not an option, then we ask for where they do feel comfortable and what might that alternative, quiet, private location be. The individual should have control at all times. So, however much they want to or not want to involve their family, we respect that. The ideal scenario is the person is comfortable with us being at their home and has various people in their life that are unpaid and choose to be in the person's life that can also attend the meeting. So people also have gone to hundreds and hundreds of meetings, right? And a social service building with lots of professionals saying, this is my perspective about the person, right? And the home visit is very, very different. So the home visit happens. So we meet with the individual and the family for 1 to 2 hours at their home. And in the meeting, the individual and their family, we want to discuss the following. So again, this is not a Q&A. These are just guides and cues for you of information that can lead us to getting some of that rich information. So daily routines. Tell me about who you are. Tell me about what you did today. Do you do this every day, or is this, do you run specific errands every Tuesday? Where do you go? What chores or responsibilities do they have around their home? What do they enjoy doing? I clean my home, but that doesn't necessarily mean I enjoy it. I just know that I need to clean the toilets, but I would really prefer to pay somebody to clean my toilets, right? Because I don't really like that. So even though I do that, it doesn't necessarily mean I want a job in that, right? But we want to have the conversation with folks. what are the activities that a person enjoys? So how do I choose to spend my time? And if I don't have a lot of direction over that, ask people, how would you like to spend your time? Are there things that you would like to learn to do that maybe you're not doing? And if folks aren't, some of these, the important part about discovery is it's not just about the conversation, it's also about observing the person. So if a person isn't terribly articulate or verbal, then we want to see people doing things. And maybe more so than we might traditionally if a person's really vocal in what they have interest in. And then also we want to know about the history of the family. What does mom and dad do? What do the siblings do? Especially related to employment. So if you would ask me, I said I really wanted to be a nurse, but my mom had worked in the healthcare industry for half of her professional life. And as a child, that's the setting that I saw her in. And I was really comfortable in that setting. Hospitals didn't scare me. I even kind of liked them. And I liked supporting, I saw her in that. And that obviously impacted me in some way. I also have a sister with a disability. So obviously that drove me to my interest in supporting people with disabilities too, right? So what our families do, whether we like it or not, impacts our own interests as well. So it's important that you explore that as well. If willing, have the person show you their bedroom. So look, how is it organized? And again, this doesn't have to be like a creepy, can you please show me your bedroom? But as the person is talking about, oftentimes they may be describing something that's really important to them. And I'll say, hey, would you mind showing me that? Or, they might say, I have an extensive jewelry collection. Would you mind showing me that extensive jewelry collection? And they say, well, sure. Okay. Well, oftentimes maybe that's kept in their room. And so they give me a tour and they show me that extensive jewelry collection. What's in their bedroom and what does it say about the person? So if you go into a bedroom and it's very sterile looking, that should also give you kind of a heads up of maybe what environment that person's living in, or maybe they aren't allowed to hang up pictures on the wall. But are there pictures? Who are the pictures of? Are there posters? What are the posters of? We'll talk about a gentleman that I met here in a few minutes of whose home visit and specifically his bedroom told us so much about who this person was. Have the person also demonstrate how he or she performs chores or engages in activities. For example, a home visit that an individual just did, the job seeker talked about how much they loved cooking. So in his home visit, he prepared the meal and they all came around for his meeting and they all had dinner together. And he made like this pasta sauce and homemade meatballs. And so, that was a way for her also to get to know that interest. When someone says they enjoy cooking, that might be enjoy cooking a TV dinner or pizza, or it might be cooking a gourmet meal, but we don't know unless we dig a little bit further. So throughout the home visit, we want to observe individuals' interactions. We want to observe their living context, environment, what their interests, their skills are. And we want to start looking for, are there reoccurring themes that might start suggesting themselves? For example, the individual who did a lot of work with his grandpa every weekend in his shed, he was working on cars every weekend. So that was something that was emerging that we wanted to go explore further. We also want to ask for names and contact information of people who know the person well, because we want to follow up with them and have additional conversations. So how do we keep the conversation going? So many of us may, be wary of that awkward silence, or, what if I run out of questions, or we don't have things to talk about? So here are just some suggestions. So repeat one word in a statement that was defining. Well, that was a really hard time in our life. Well, that was a hard time. Can you tell me more? Or that was exciting. Okay, just probe and say, tell me more. Or tell me about your day yesterday. So sometimes when we go in and say, well, just tell me a little bit about yourself, sometimes that question is too big for folks, including ourselves. A lot of people have a hard time answering that question. So if you just say, well, tell me about what you did yesterday, that can get the conversation going, and leads us to, okay, well, do you do this every day? Do you do this every week? Do you go with the same person? Tell me about your friends and your family. How often do you see them? What do they do for a living? Where do you spend your time and money? Says a lot about folks too. And then questions for their friends and family. Tell us about your son or daughter. What does that person enjoy doing or get joy from doing? Are they in any associations, group involvement? Are they, do they participate in their church, their service clubs? Tell us what they do for a living. And so we want to follow up with individuals in the home visit and their friends and family. Maybe they couldn't be at the home visit and have those conversations as well. Mm-hmm. So the outcome of the home visit is we get an idea of what the person's skills, interests, abilities, and conditions and contributions are. So what are the person's skills? So did we see them doing, I even had one person, he talked really passionately about his video games. And he had this like big video game chair where he was going to like do driving and he talked about how it was something that he really enjoyed doing with his father and his brother. So it was this family bonding activity. But there are a lot of, he said, but he was talking about the setup. And so I asked him, hey, well, would you mind setting that up for me? And so what he did is he had this big chair that he used, but it was tucked away in a corner. So he had to like maneuver the chair around all the other furniture and didn't like scratch it at all, which tells me, this kid's got some muscles, right? Like this chair had to have been like 35, 50 pounds. And he's like maneuvering it carefully around the home. And then he starts like plugging in all of these cords. He patiently waits 3 minutes because around 3 minutes, it was an extended period of time though to wait for the system to boot. And he knew exactly the amount of time. And then, he set up and plugged in the controllers. And so, there's some technology potentially interests there. There's also maybe if he talked more, this family also went go-kart racing. His brother was a mechanic at a speed racing shop. So there's also this mechanical theme that might be emerging as well. So that also leads to interest. So what are the person's interests? And that doesn't necessarily, interests don't get us the job, but they lead us to places that give us more information about who the person is, that type of business. You think about the people that you enjoy working with the most, oftentimes you have common interests with them, right? So that's important. What are the person's abilities? What are their conditions? So, excuse me, their conditions are, what do I have to be successful in the environment? This is where we've got to have a real clear picture of what accommodations might be needed. So for example, I supported a woman who experiences cerebral palsy, and she is going to need extended break times. She's going to need an accessible work environment. And she's going to need to be able to be in an environment where she can request those extended break times and bathrooms breaks so that she can have, and they need to be scheduled so that her CDAC provider can come in and provide those supports to her. And then what are people's contributions? What do they offer that nobody else offers? Is it an infectious attitude? Is it the ability to memorize people's names and orders? Or is it, we learn all about these things, and the home visit isn't going to give you the extensive list of it, but it's going to give you an idea. You should be thinking about, hey, what might these things be from the information I have so far? Where do I need to get more information about this? So that might be where we want to talk to others or set up observations. And then what do I have no clue about that I really need to come back and re-explore or something, okay? So let's look at an example. So this is a young man that I met in Utah. And he, if you've heard me speak before, I probably told you about him, but it's just such a beautiful example that hits on a lot of different points. So when I met him, and this is an individual who'd experienced a lot of institutionalized experience in his life. And he lives in a community. This is his home. These are his chickens. I believe this is Lily. And when I met him, his job developer knew he was really interested in animals, but they were filling out applications at pet stores such as PetSmart. Now, what does PetSmart have to do with chickens? Nothing. PetSmart is a retail location. It has nothing to do with chickens, other than maybe they sell chicken food. I don't know. But that's a retail environment, not an animal environment, right? So what we did is we said, okay, well, where are people in the community that also have an interest in chickens? So we connected him with a couple of different businesses, and we'll get back to that because I want to bring us back to the home visit. So when we met him at his home, the living room environment was very clean, well kept. He had roommates. It was a group home, so they didn't have a lot of creativity in designing the main space. But when he showed me his room, it screamed all things about him that he was already telling us about. So he had all in like the corners of his ceiling were different little plants. So he like had started a spider plant. He had some plantlings going on. So he definitely has this green thumb. And then outside he shows us where he has his garden and a compost pile as well. And then there are bird books everywhere. And it's not like the bookshelves in my office where books look like they haven't been touched or maybe even read. These books have they've been tagged, there's sticky notes sticking out of them. They have been read and used and abused. And then he has a plastic owl that you usually set outside, like to scare away birds. This was his project. He had picked it up at like a local thrift shop, and he was turning it into a bank so that he could put, his money in there and save up for something he wanted to purchase. So it was all things birds. It was all things agriculture. It highlighted exactly who he was. And sometimes it's not always going to be that clear, but sometimes it will be. And that it's going to give you so much rich information about who this person is. And sometimes we have to dig further, and that's okay. But in the background, you see right behind his head is the chicken coop that he built and designed specifically for his chickens, with ample space. He only feeds them organic food. So while we were taking these pictures, he was showing us exactly what food he feeds the chickens, why he feeds them certain foods. And then we connected him with like a local store that's kind of like a farmer's market, only it's a storefront, and they have chickens and sell organic eggs. So we started our conversation there about, hey, we're just trying to connect him with folks who know other things about chickens. So then we went to some organic chicken farms, and connected with a woman who was like literally, his mentor, the match. Like they totally hit it off. But we do that when we connect people with like interests, and then things start getting really, they start falling into place. So that's where we want to trust the process and let it take us where it needs to go. The person neighborhood. So, transportation is an issue for many of us, and we end up developing jobs maybe 20 or 30 miles away. But let's access the community around us first, particularly in small communities, because everybody knows everybody, which is fantastic. What businesses are in that neighborhood? And we're not just talking about storefront businesses, but who works out of their home in that neighborhood? Who owns maybe 2 doors down is, the guy who owns the local hardware store, or maybe has his own construction business. That information matters. Or maybe is the environment or the neighborhood they live in something that we need to be aware of, and maybe it's not the best neighborhood. Is there any safety concerns that we need to be aware of? Do they connect with their neighbors? Do their neighbors know who they are? Is there available transportation? Or is maybe the next door neighbor retired and could maybe be a potential transportation option in the future? So pay attention to that information. We don't know where it's going to take us yet, but we want to be cognizant of it. All right, so step 2, we want to interview others. So we've been authorized for discovery. We set up the home visit. We had the home visit. We've got some really initial rich information. And so the next step is we want to follow up and interview with other people who know the person well. So we're building on that initial dialogue. So why do we want to interview other people? We've got to get a bigger picture of who the person is. So it also helps us fill in gaps from the home visit. There are going to be questions you have. There's going to be information where you're going to say, ugh, that's just not adding up. So for example, we did a home visit a couple of months ago with a guy in Utah. And this individual had experienced multiple traumatic brain injuries and had a really interesting past vocationally, from, maybe some business ownership to, working for some friends. But due to his impact of disability, it was really hard to get an accurate glimpse of that vocational past and kind of where things fit. So having conversations with his siblings and having a conversation with his case manager who had been supporting him for an extended period of time really helped us fill in the gaps from the home visit. Another example is a guy that we worked with who kept talking about, and this man was not terribly verbal. Didn't use a lot of words to communicate. But he kept talking about a Jeep. He just kept coming back to a Jeep. And, we're kind of like, well, okay, like Jeep ? We need to figure out more about that. We had a conversation with his dad who couldn't join us that day. And we had this really cool conversation with his dad for 2 hours. And he elaborated that when he was a kid, because this man's mind is so mechanical and he loves cars, and will even wants to immediately see an engine, right? So, but we find out that his dad and him built Jeeps when he was like a kid. So he would always talk about red Jeep, blue Jeep, and they built a red Jeep and they built a blue Jeep. And then the way his mind worked was that he memorized how to put together the red Jeep and how to put together the blue Jeep. And so they would talk about how they did this. They would kind of rehash the process. Which tells us that whoa, he's got an incredible mechanical brain, right? So how can we capitalize on that? That's a skill. And who might benefit from that skill? So, then maybe we go talk to other people who would have similar interests in engines, and we just start that conversation and see where it goes. We also want to link together information. So when we interview others who have been at the home visit, or maybe it came out in the home visit that this person is important to them, we want to connect, how does all of this come together? And then after the conversation, you should be getting information that kind of confirms the themes that you've been talking about or that have been emerging in the home visit. So for example, let's go with that mechanical theme. So, he talked a lot about engines and kept talking about wanting to work on a bus. Well, he's really fascinated with the type of engines that are in bus, like a Mack engine or something like that. This is obviously not my area of expertise. But so we connected that with the further conversation with his dad. And, we start seeing that information keeps building. That reoccurring theme keeps coming up and tells us we should focus there. And then also it can tell us, actually, maybe this isn't a theme and maybe this is just something that the person just enjoys. I cook because I enjoy eating, not necessarily because I enjoy to cook, right? So you might find that out too. But it always helps answer, who is this person? It gives us additional information of who the person is and helps us get that bigger picture. So who do we interview? It can be specific family members, parents, grandparents, siblings, cousins, friends, teachers. It might be doctors or therapists if the person requests that. Also, doctors and therapists can be the folks that are saying, oh, Joe can't work. But actually we know that, when I have purpose and contribution in my community, that's helpful, right? So we want to be talking to folks who are supportive of the person working, ideally, and anyone who knows the person at their best and is a significant part in their life. Paid staff is the last resort. We want to exhaust, are there unpaid people in the person's life first? Then we go to paid staff and get their feedback. which can also be valuable. I don't mean to say that it's not valuable. It's just ideally we want to tap into those unpaid folks first. Those who attend the home visit, but we maybe need additional information from. So for example, the guy where grandpa at the end of the meeting was like, hey, well, Joe, comes and hangs out at my shop every weekend. We want to follow up with grandpa and get more information about what's going on the weekend. And as we talk to folks, it's a no judging zone, okay? It can be real easy to judge parents and family members, but we are not judging them. We have not walked in their shoes, and this is just information gathering, okay? So we're just seeking out additional information. And it might be possible that you have a conversation with someone for an hour and a half, and it's only the last 15 minutes where the richest information presents itself. That's okay, because it takes that time to get us there, okay? Everything is valuable. So how to plan and schedule for the interview. So you want to say, hey, we had this home visit and would it be okay if I follow up with you? And if we plan for an hour or so to chat, you can meet over lunch, you can meet for coffee, it can be over the phone if maybe they live in a different area of the state or even out of state. And you want to say, I'm here to learn about Joe. And I know that you know him incredibly well, being his sister, and I want you to just tell me about who he is. And you let the conversation go where it needs to. You can say, tell me about your relationship with him. And, tell me about some experiences that you've had with him. Do you go on, excuse me, let the conversation go where it needs to go. So we've done the home visit. We followed up with others. We're getting some pretty good information about who this person is and maybe some potential interests that we want to explore. So now we want to see the person in action, and we want to follow the pathway that the home visit and the interviews have taken us on. We don't want to just do the home visit and then schedule skills and tasks that have nothing to do with what we've learned. Everything ties together, okay? So interviewing others. So what patterns are emerging? What information is consistent or new? And what does it tell us about the person? So we want to begin translating and connecting that information to identify those emerging themes. So again, everything builds on top of the next. So when we link discovery to observation, we want to participate with a job seeker in a novel or unfamiliar activity, as well as family activities or routine that are familiar. And we want to document with notes and pictures, and all of this information then gets built into your positive personal profile for rehab. So we want to know about the person's interests, their performance, successful support strategies. So if we went and observed Joe with grandpa in the shop, how is grandpa supporting him? Does he support him with words, or is it all nonverbal? Does he follow grandpa? Are they working in two completely different corners? Does he hand him a wrench? Does grandpa call it a wrench and then he gets the specific wrench and brings it over? So we're looking at skills, tasks, interests, those ideal conditions, those support needs. And we want to connect to the person. We want to see them in familiar activities, but we also want to see them in familiar activities, but add something new. So maybe we know that he's comfortable in grandpa's shop and we see that first, but maybe the next activity is connecting him with someone who works on cars professionally and owns, J&D's body shop down the street. And we just want to say, hey, could we come and pick your brain, because Joe here is really interested and passionate about motors, and you've worked on my car for years and I trust you. Would you just be willing to meet with us and let Joe shadow you for a couple of hours? And so that's where we start getting to know about the business piece at the same time. So at the same time, we're confirming these skills, tasks, interests, and themes with the activity and the observation. And at the same time, it's an opportunity to begin those conversations with businesses. So the biggest piece with skill and task observation when you're first beginning to learn about discovery is I see us naturally want to jump into, well, let's observe the person in the facility-based setting or day habilitation. Or let's go to the movies, or let's walk around the mall, let's go to the grocery store. Those things, you're just going. You're not really doing, right? You're just watching a person go to do this. Why is it that you want to go to the movies with this person? Because they like movies? Well, if you know they like movies, why don't you connect them with someone who does movie editing? Or, what are types of different positions around movies? Or, I hear on the radio all the time those companies that will take your VHSs and put them on a DVD or a flash drive. Discovery is doing. We want to see, I want to see this person's hands moving. So if someone is interested in culinary, let's make a homemade pizza or cookies. It doesn't have to be at the business yet. At this point, maybe you just want to see how they follow a recipe, or connect them with someone who, so for example, my boss, Carrie, this one woman had this emerging theme of culinary, and she said that she wanted to make a pizza, and she always enjoyed cooking at home. But so what they did is, Carrie's really proficient in making bread and dough, and he's culinary is in his wheelhouse. So what they did is they made a pizza from scratch together, and she's smiling and she's throwing the dough up in the air, and he's using systematic instruction, and he's learning that, she's actually really meticulous with her measurements. She's a quick learner. His support to her is really minimal, but this was a woman who was at the workshop stacking hangers, and, they said that she was really, she's the one that's going to throw a hanger at your face, which never happened. But once they started doing something that she had interest in, the process changed, the experience changed. Someone who likes to work with their hands, go out to a junkyard and let them tinker with an engine and see what happens. Is it someone who really enjoys singing? And so it might not be watching them necessarily sing, because they can sing, but how do they set up for singing the national anthem? Do they have certain rituals that they perform beforehand? Do they eat certain foods? Do they do certain things? You're kind of peeling the layers of an onion. You're digging deeper. For my friend in Utah, it's taking care of chickens. That was one of the discovery activities that we wanted to see him do, was taking care of his chickens, and then we set it up so he could go and take care of somebody else's chickens that came through an informational interview that he was going to job shadow, and then they said, hey, we actually don't have anybody taking care of our chickens. Could you come out 2 hours a day? And so that became part of the discovery process, but he also ended up getting paid for a couple of hours. Also, it could be attending a social or a family gathering where the job seeker has specific responsibilities. Another example was an individual that we worked with who, his family described him as a very detailed, helpful person. But the person that we were seeing was not very detailed and was not very helpful. He was very exploratory and wanted to be in all sorts of different places. So his community and his family described him at church, and the person that they were describing at church was very different than the person we were seeing. So one of the skill and task observations was going and observing and spending time with him that Sunday morning to see all the things that he did at church. So what do these things have in common? Ice cream, coffee, puppies, babies, kittens, right? Oftentimes, how many of us as job developers have heard, well, I want to work with babies or I want to work with pets, right? So we think ARL or a daycare, and if I have to go to either of those places one more time, you're going to rip your hair out. I challenge you to get further beyond these interests, because they're general human interests, right? Our brains are, automatically say, oh, well, who doesn't enjoy these things to some capacity? Like a kitten is cute, but I don't want to take care of them. A dog is cute, but I don't want to pick up the dog poop. So they're just general human interests. And for some folks, it's going to be a passion, but for most, dig further. Maybe that's all they've been told that they know how to do or that they might be interested in, right? But maybe it's just an interest, and we've got to dig further and get to know that person deeper. So with skill and task observation, a big thing is knowing, okay, so what's a skill and what's a task? So a task is a series of actions that complete a process. Of milking a cow involves multiple actions and multiple skills that makes up the task, right? We also are looking for the best teaching and support strategies. A lot of people, may not want that verbal support, but they may want a visual support. Or, oftentimes our best teaching is done without using words, because words can be confusing. How do they process information? How do they also try new but related tasks? If it's a new task, this might give you an idea of what that first day of work is going to look like. But be thinking, where else do these or similar tasks make sense? So that leads you to future observations. And then interests help find a direction for employment, but skills are really what a person needs to be able to, what we offer to the business, right? Is skills. So interests get us moving in a direction, but it's the skills that really we, start negotiating with the business around. And then we use discovery to uncover the person's skills and those skills that can be developed. So it's not just about what can the person do at this snapshot in time, but we want to support folks to continue learning, right? Because if we just get stagnant, we get bored, right? So how can we also teach the person new skills as well? Or how can a new business teach that person skills? So informational interviews are big, right? So one of the pieces that we use to start connecting and using those observations is to start reaching out to businesses. And again, I think this is really one of the places where that coalition makes a lot of sense, is you may all come to the meeting and say, I'm working with Joe. Joe's interested in agriculture, mechanical, and culinary. Who in the coalition has small business connections that we could just go connect with? At that point, your role is not to go in and ask for a job. Do not go in and say, are you hiring? That's not what we're there for at that point. We only want to connect and say, hey, I'm working with Joe. He's passionate about agriculture. I hear you're passionate about agriculture. Can we just connect and talk and tell me about what you do and how you got into the industry? And that's where we start. So it guides the initial interactions with the business. We also watch for opportunities. Because opportunities may present themselves at informational interviews. And then we also want to highlight the mutual interest for folks. So when we connected the chicken guy with the organic chicken farmer, those two just hit it off, and we got to kind of like hang out in the background and just observe, because they kicked it off on their own, which was really, really cool. Doesn't always happen like that, but so real quick, a lot of times as job developers, we're spending our time only connecting with businesses who are big box retailers. And as you can see from the graph here, we're missing the majority of businesses that make up the entire country are small single owner businesses and small businesses with 20 or less employees. That's where we want to tap into. So being from small communities is fantastic, because small businesses make up small communities, right? I would much rather do job development in a small town than a big city any day, because we can figure out how to connect to people very quickly. So when we set up for an informational interview, we want to think about language. So, who are you? What do you want to label yourself as? You don't have to be a job developer. You could be a career counselor. You could be, an account rep. I don't care. But what makes sense in talking with that business? Oftentimes, they don't know what a job developer is or who a job developer is. Also, who are you working with? How are you going to describe Joe? Joe is a person who's really passionate about working with cars, or instead of saying Joe's a person with a disability and he's, going through a transition program, how can we represent Joe in the best light? Also, what are we asking for? We are not asking for a job. We are just going in and asking for information. We are asking for advice. And that gets the conversation going. And it doesn't matter. We don't know where it's going to go yet. We're just collecting information. So think through these things before you reach out to the business. And when we say don't bait and switch the business, that means don't bait them by saying, I just want to pick your brain for advice. And then when we go meet, we say, are you hiring? We don't want to do that, because then we've already broken some trust with the business. Okay, if they bring it up, that's one thing, but we're just there to gather information. So to start the informational interview, we want to introduce the job seeker. 9 times out of 10, we want the job candidate to be with us during the informational interview. Now, if you know that the job candidate may not be at their best yet, or it's possible that maybe you want to go first and then come back to it and bring the job candidate. But ideally, we want them to be there. Highlight the commonalities between the business and the individual. So why are we there? Because they're both passionate about motors, and we want to pick their brain. So we want to really listen and learn. Again, just like the home visit, we don't want to do all the talking. It's not the opportunity for you to go in and say all about what your provider does. That's not the time. We're just there to get to know who they are. And if they ask you, yes, provide some information. But 80-20, you should be doing 20% of the talking. They should be doing 80% of the talking. To ask how they got into this line of work. How did they start their company? What are, what's the business and industry doing? What's most up and coming in their business? If they had an extra $5,000, what would they invest in? When are their busy times? Make it conversational. All right, so let's see where we're at here real quick. Let me make sure, because we're coming to a close. So I want to make sure here how much time we have to get through things. Okay, so let's see if we can get through a few more slides here. All right, so with the discovery team meeting and the dialogue, so it's really important that we pull the team back together. So at this point, you've done the home visit, which was a couple of hours, right? You spent about 2 hours there. Then you want to talk to others who are important to the job seeker. That's going to be another 2 to 4 hours. So you're 6 hours into about 10 hours. And then you want to do the skill and task observations and do a couple of those, and then pull the team back together and share that initial information. So you want to invite everyone who is at the home visit to come back together, and you're taking what you've learned and asking the team, am I on the right track? So you want to share that positive personal profile and say, hey, are we all on the same page? And that gets everybody on the same page. It also builds cohesion as a team. And don't be alarmed if they're say, well, yeah, this is a great start, but this is some, don't forget that this is really important to Joe. That's where, we also pull family in, which really helps families get on the same page as you. And I think helps avoid some of that conflict that maybe we run into by not being on the same page. And ideally set a date for that follow-up meeting 6 to 8 weeks after you've been authorized for discovery, because that also gives you a deadline to get all of these things done and keeps the process moving. So the discovery team meeting dialogue should be similar concepts to the home visit. It should be comfortable. It should be casual. It might happen on an evening or a weekend. It's going to be 1 to 2 hours in length. And this is where some initial brainstorming might begin as far as what are additional businesses that we could go and follow up with. And families have contacts too. So, where might they connect you with other businesses that you could go and learn more information from? So outcomes, again, of discovery is it could be competitive integrated employment. It might be wage, traditional wage employment. It could be a carved position. It could be a customized internship or apprenticeship. It could be resource ownership. So again, just know that discovery is the first process. And this is just where we want to keep our focus at this point, is in discovery and getting to know who the person is. And we'll be filling out the positive personal profile, which, that's what's going to complete that service for VR. So we want to make sure that we get that completed and use that as use that as one of our training tools too, right? So we're going to do the home visit. We'll model that. We'll fill out that positive personal profile together. And again, as we complete the positive personal profile, we're only highlighting contributions. We're not talking about, here's a laundry list of the things that a person can't do. That's not the intent. And we want to use various development, you can use various development forms to help guide you through the process if you want. Could be the discovery staging record that we use at Griffin Hammis. It could be vocational profiles through Mark Golden Associates. But for sure, VR is going to ask you to fill out the positive personal profile, and we'll use that as an example. So as you complete the positive personal profile, I want you to think of a descriptive writing process. You're describing the person and their interests. So if you were writing a news story, what are the facts? It's not your opinions, it's facts and observations. So think of, the last time that you met with someone for the first time. What are 3 sounds that stuck out to you? What are 3 smells? What are 3 objects? And so this is just an exercise that we use to kind of get that descriptive writing going versus more of a clinical approach. We're staying away from that clinical piece and we're really describing, who is this person? What is the environment? What does it say about who this person is? And you should feel comfortable in turning over that positive personal profile to the individual and their family and them being comfortable reading it. So think about, if someone was writing about you, what would you want them to describe? Try filling it out on yourself. I think that's a great way to also experience what it might feel like too, right? Of what we're asking people to go through. So just to recap really quick, with discovery in Voc Rehab and the positive personal profile, we first start with the discovery plan, which we step off with the home visit. We then move to the discovery dialogue, where we've interviewed others, we've done the observations, we're now pulling the team back together. And then we complete the positive personal profile. And at that point, it should also highlight the information that's missing. So maybe then that's when you request job shadows or career exploration, or maybe you need to come back to discovery and ask for an additional authorization to get more information. But that's where we start building that menu of services to really support the person to get that paid employment outcome, if that makes sense. For some folks, it may make sense just to go straight to job development. It's going to look different for everyone. So, all right. We're at 10:59, and my next slide says stop. So we have made it through all the content. Do we have any questions real quick? I will make sure that I send out the PowerPoint so that you can share that with folks. This is being recorded as well, so that will be available. Let's pull up the chat box. Okay. Thoughts, questions, comments? Okay. I'm thinking folks not hearing any questions, so I think this concludes our webinar at this time. And please feel free to email me directly if you have questions, or call. I will put that information in the chat box if you don't have it already.
Thanks, Ashley.
Ashley, this is
Thank you.
This is Dave, and I'll make sure I get the recording to you, and you can send it out to our providers. And they can use that then for training as staff come in and out.
Hey,
Sounds
that'd be
great.
great.
Great. Thanks, everyone. Enjoy the day.
You
Thank
too.
you.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.